All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you are standing up, if you want to find a seat. Hello. All right. I was going to have people stand up and say hello to your neighbor, but I think everyone just got a break. Is everybody feeling okay? Okay. All right, good. Well, I think one thing, just before I start, just to get you primed, start thinking about if you have a specific question or a question about partnerships. So just start kind of thinking about that. What questions do I have about partnerships? Just to get started, so my name is Ted Dezember, and I am the Senior Manager of Educational Initiatives and Youth Programs at King County Housing Authority. So today's panel is not necessarily about like the why of housing and education and health partnerships. I think we got that in other places, and I think this audience gets it. So today we want to focus more about sharing with you some of our stories, experiences, and anecdotes about how we started partnerships, how we sustain partnerships, who we work with, why we work with them, and just generally, I think anything that we can share about how we foster positive and successful relationships. So, and we're going to break up our time kind of in two sections. So we'll be talking heads for a few minutes. Each panel member will share a little bit about their organization and just some kind of opening thoughts. And then we're going to have more of a roundtable conversation and engage with you all in conversations. So that's how we're going to use our time. So very quickly, just want to put a plug in for this multimedia report. Has anybody had a chance to see this yet from the CLPHA just put out? Great. Well, if you haven't, I really encourage you to check it out. There's a lot of really great, useful information on that tool. It's going to go way more in depth than what we could really do today, but so definitely want to make sure you're aware of it and encourage you to go and check it out. So
you can find it at clapha.org/elements-of-success.
Yeah. Yeah, and it features the I-5 corridor. So it's King County Housing Authority, Seattle Housing Authority, Tacoma Housing Authority, and our experiences with partnership. So very quickly, wanted to share with you just who's in front of you. So we have next to me, I have Judy Buckmaster, who is the Executive Director of Student Services in the Bellevue School District. Next to her is Jessica Barros. Jessica is the Executive Director of Communications, Government, Public Relations at the Puget Sound Educational Service District. Colin Groth, he's the Vice President of Programs for Strive Together. And then myself, Senior Manager of Educational Initiatives and Youth Programs with King County Housing Authority. And I also want to introduce Rachel Langford right here in the front. Go ahead and wave, Rachel. Rachel is going to be facilitating or moderating our roundtable conversation in a little bit. So, what we wanted to do is get a feel of like kind of who's in the room. So I just have some quick questions for you, and all you need to do is just raise your hand. So these degrees, I made these up. These aren't like in a book or something. So I just to try to get a feel. So like who in the room would say they're like in a new partnership? So like you're just kind of recently started together, working together. So who would say they're in a new partnership? A few. All right, great. Who would say they're kind of more in this formed stage? So maybe you're working together for a while, you're doing stuff, but it's not like institutional maybe, or who would put themselves in that? All right, great. And then who would say like we are established, we have a data sharing agreement and an MOU and all that sort of stuff? Who would put themselves there? Okay, so it's about equal. That is helpful, thank you. And then the next thing, kind of the same. So who, anybody from housing authorities? Okay, so what about other affordable housing developers, so like non-PHAs? Anybody? A few? Great. Great. Schools? A few, great. Community-based partners? Yeah, all right. And then, policy, research, foundation. Okay, great. So it's a nice spread as well. So thank you for that. What we want to do is try to tailor this conversation and our remarks to help you in your partnership work. So before we really dive into our part of the questions or our part of the conversation, just wondering if people have questions already. Does anybody have, I asked you to start thinking about that at the beginning. Does anybody have a question? Just kind of shout it out and we'll just kind of take note.
No, I'm going to throw this out there. Again, I'm doing Hicks from Partnership for Children and Youth, represent the Director of Housing and Education. I feel like I've spoken at every room, so you all probably know me by now. My question is, I've been working with housing. I'm on the education policy research side, and I've had the pleasure of working with housing for about 7 years, and the majority of the housing agencies I work with have made a decision to run youth program directly themselves. And the reason why is because, even though it's expensive and turnover, they haven't been really successful with partners. Because when partners come in and run youth program, they often bring their organization mission, vision, goals, and though they try to partner with them and set these MOUs, they still kind of begin to run it as their own, they kind of just let go. And then when something happens, God forbid something does happen with those partners get to walk away. And then the housing agency is then responsible, and it looks like it's their fault. And so my question is more what structures and systems have you put in place to really establish either shared goals, objectives, to create data agreements, to do shared, not just they do their own assessment, but you can actually go assess their program too, that you have, you own. They kind of come in and they're providing a service, but it's very clear to the partner that you are the face and that they're representing you. What type of MOUs and structures have you put in place? Because that's my concern, is housing taking in partners, but then that partner doing some great service and walking away, or unfortunately doing something that wasn't so cool and having to answer for that.
Yeah.
So what systems do you put in place to ensure yourself against that?
Great.
So
Thank you. Any other questions? Again, we're just trying to get questions and make sure we're going to say stuff that actually means things to you. So.
My question is, so I feel like my organization is always in every 3 phases of partnerships, but it seems like the more bureaucratic a partnership is, the more surprises I get, meaning, we're approached by somebody from a school district, save us, implement this grant for us, and we talk to the principal and says, I don't like you, I don't want you on my campus, why do you have to be here? Or a city partnership the same way, we're gravy with, this level, and then we get to do a presentation and we get tomatoes thrown at us by a neighborhood association. So any advice on how to, especially in bigger bureaucratic kind of partnerships, what we can do differently so that we're not stoned at a meeting that we thought we were, helping kind of thing, so that perspective.
Okay.
I'm Erica with Boys and Girls Clubs in Austin.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alicia Anderson. I'm with HUD. I'm hoping that you could have a conversation about all things continuity. When we get grant applications in, it's always this wonderful story about the existing partnership, and you'll see these wonderful MOUs. But 2-3 years down the road, and especially in some of our housing, that's a 40-year use agreement. Come year 5, year 10, the partnership has dissolved. The expectation is just left undone. So I'm hoping that you can just continue to have this conversation throughout.
Thank you.
I believe this question has already been asked. I'm just saying it in a different way. So I'm Dr. Coleman. I'm from DC Public Schools. And what I have noticed that in our attempt to build partnerships people are reluctant to develop partnerships because everyone wants to get the recognition, for lack of better words, that goes along with the efficacy and the effectiveness with the program, and so no one is willing to share. And I believe that's ultimately at the heart of two of the other questions that were posed. I'm just saying it in a different way, but how to navigate that space.
Okay. One more?
Hi, I'm Peggy from the Community Builders, and I want to know, when you are developing a partnership, what kind of language you use to alleviate a partner's fear that you are there to evaluate or judge them.
Okay. All right, thank you. Those are great questions, and I see Rachel taking notes, so I think we can address some of those in the panel part of the conversation. So thank you for that. And also on your table are note cards, and so like as we're talking here, if other questions pop up, feel free to write your question on that, and then we'll make sure to create space that we can collect those from you kind of before we do the round table. So I think every table has note cards, so feel free to do that. So now is the talking head part. We'll try to go through this quickly, but just want to kind of set the table so you can kind of hear about our experiences, and then that might help you also think about specific questions you might have kind of based on our own experiences. So I just want to kind of quickly share with you our view of housing as a platform. And so this is, how we think about it. Essentially, intergenerational poverty is a result of many forces, right? And so it's going to take cross-sector partnerships to solve them, right? We need to work together. And at KCHA, we've realized, we are but one part of a system that supports families. But if we really want to support families in achieving their hopes and dreams, it takes more. And so how we think about our role as a houser and the tools or levers that we employ to support improved outcomes fall into these three buckets. And so essentially our strengths, right? So it's access to families. In our particular case, across King County, nearly 20,000 children spread across our various programs. And we have infrastructure. So in the sense that we have 15, we've developed or built 15 out-of-school time facilities on housing sites that host out-of-school time programs like Boys and Girls Clubs and YMCAs, as well as developed 3 early learning centers on some of our properties. And so we're able to, actually build things to hold these types of programs. And then we're also able to pull the lever around advocacy and policy. And so in conversations like this. Another thing that we have done at KCHA to support educational partnerships is intentional placement or hiring of cross sectors. And so my background is actually in education. So I was a teacher and an administrator before I came to this position. So as an example of bringing that expertise into the Housing Authority. Also intentional partnerships by the superintendent of our local educational service district as a member of our Board of Commissioners. And there's also intentional placement of myself and folks on my team in other regional collaborations and steering committees, so that we're able to infuse kind of the housing lens into those collaborative efforts. And I want to share this with you. So I think in thinking about partnerships, one thing I was reflecting on in preparation for this is like, so how do we partner? And I think one thing I'm really excited about is, over the last 3 years, or 4 years really, developing a much clearer vision on kind of the where and the how. So where can we support improved educational outcomes? How can we do that? And so these, probably align a lot to the work that other housing authorities are doing out there. But we have, essentially 5 goals for our work that we want to see out of families and kids. And so one is around family engagement. So you can see that that's kind of a foundational piece. Everything that we do really kind of stems from that relationship and access that we have with families. And our goal there is we want to make sure that every family has the tools and knowledge that would help them or help their children succeed in school. Building off of that, it goes into kindergarten readiness. So we have a goal that our kids are all ready for success in kindergarten when they show up that very first day. Then then the next piece of that is attendance. Kids, you can't learn if you're not in school. So we have a goal around our kids not being chronically absent from school. Then building off of that, bridging the high quality out of school learning experiences with what's happening in the school. So making direct collaboration and partnerships between the out of school and the school day. And so our goal there is ensuring that kids have access to high quality extended learning opportunities. And then the last is around college access, and our goal there is that all kids are graduating on time and with a goal for college. And so inside of each of these domains, and I'm not going to go through all of these because that would be the whole presentation, but we've developed different strategies. And so these are just some examples. And the reason I want to share this with you is, as we're talking about partnerships, from what I have realized is, to be effective partners, we have to know ourselves. And we have to know what we're good at, where we feel like we can help move the needle, and what our strategies or interventions that we are well placed to support the success in. And the other piece I want to call out here in our view around partnerships is that our school district's goals, so there's 17 school districts inside of King County. We have in-depth formal partnerships with 3. And those school districts' goals are our goals, right? Like when the schools are being successful, our kids are being successful. And so how can we leverage, those domains and these strategies in support of our schools and our school districts in achieving their goals? And I think that that's just a really important piece I wanted to call out in terms of our partnership. And I think it's one reason we have fairly effective partnerships. I'm not in it for the recognition or anything like that for the Housing Authority. I'm trying to work myself out of a job, right? The ideal world would be our schools are so successful and the systems are performing in such a way that they don't need me, right? But until we get there, I will be here. And also, this is important because we're able to plug into existing efforts, and other efforts are able to plug in with us. And so that's just another piece I wanted to call out about ours. And then the last high-level thing I wanted to share, just in terms of partnerships, is a bit of an evolution in my own thinking in terms of how we partner to improve educational outcomes. When I first started coming from the education space, it was all about the housing authority and the school district, being married and sharing data and, very tight relationship. And I think my thinking has evolved to be yes and. So it's yes that, and if we really want to get to results, we need broader partnerships. We need, in a sense, collective partnerships and collective impact. And I've had the opportunity to really get acquainted and learn about collective impact and in our local community, this strategy, methodology, however you want to think about it, is really taking off. So this is just inside of King County. These are all different cities inside of our county, and the different collective partnerships that exist in those communities. And because now we know better, the Housing Authority knows better kind of what our levers are, what our strengths are, the where, the how, the why stuff, we're able to show up in these spaces and do our part, right? It's shared performance, right? And so when we are talking at a community level about the whole community, we're able to step up and support specific strategies and interventions for our targeted population. And through that, right, then if we're doing our part and then everyone else is kind of doing their part, all of that stacks up on top of each other, and ultimately that's how we're going to get to positive results for kids. And so, and another thing that I've really come to appreciate and realize more about collective impact is that when you are a member of a partnership like this, it's really easy to stay aligned because you have something that you're all drawn to. You have a shared common mission and goal. And the first session that was in this room was talking about, kind of feeding relationships, that successful partnerships are based off of relationships. And through these types of partnerships, we are able to build those positive relationships. So, for example, Judy and I are both on the board of directors for Eastside Pathways. And so we see each other at all the board meetings, we see each other at all of the collaborative events, and we're able to, we talk about our own partnership, but then it's also, we're talking about the greater partnership. And another piece for my own learning in this is my evolution towards thinking about collective impact is this idea, and I hate the word maybe, but the burden of partnership on school districts. So in our circumstances, we have school districts that are being asked by 100 different partners to partner, right? And if in thinking about how can we, collectively come together, then we're all one partnership, right? And it's much easier to think about managing. So the frustration of I'm not getting FaceTime with the executive director of student services, that's frustrating. But when we're part of collectives, she's sitting next to me as part of a board, and part of a board meeting. And so just thinking about how, from the school district's perspective, how collective impact can, ease that burden of partnership, and I think ultimately, have more successful partnerships. So I'm going to stop there. That's my part of setting the table, and I'm going to pass it on to Colin, and just to dig into this notion of collective impact, just in case folks aren't very familiar with what am I talking about when I say collective impact? Colin.
So quick show of hands, how many folks before Ted has said it a couple times have heard collective impact? All right. So I have the great honor and privilege of working for a group called Strive Together. We are an organization that believes in the success of every child every step of the way from cradle to career. And we express that by supporting 69 community partnerships representing more than 10.4 million children across the country. And we have a big problem with the term collective impact, because what we've seen over the past few years is that collective impact has become sort of this watered down repackaging, often for funders, of traditional collaboration. I hear some chuckles. I'm imagining that might have resonated with some folks. So I wanted to talk about, this actually comes from, any New Mexico folks in the room, this actually comes from the newspaper in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this highlights, I think, the challenge that we were attempting to solve for in Cincinnati, where I'm based and where the Strive Partnership originally was founded, and how it's now grown into this national network of nearly 70 communities. But what we find in a lot of communities is the conversation around education looks something like this. All right, does this resonate with anyone? All right, so you've got the workforce folks saying we need more talent. I distinctly remember moving back from Ohio State to Cincinnati in 2005, and the Tom Friedman book, The World is Flat, had come out, right? And everybody was like, oh my God, globalization, right? And the buzz line in Cincinnati, which never made any sense, was we're no longer competing with Indianapolis, we're competing with India. No idea what that meant. Right, but super buzzy. The chamber was all over it. Right, it became the thing. Right, we were like all of a sudden, oh my God, we're competing with India. So the thing I think that happened in Cincinnati, and that we're so excited to be here on stage with two of our network members represented in the room, is that there's a couple key differences that we see in what has to happen to move from kind of traditional collaboration to collective impact. And so I'm just going to throw these out. I'm going to test them. You let me know if they resonate. The first one is around how we come together in communities. And often what we find is that in communities, collaborations are born by convening around programs or initiatives, right? Or often around RFPs, as opposed to coming together around outcomes. So I'm just going to leave that there for a minute. Before you ever talk about a program, an initiative, a strategy, what are you actually trying to achieve? We think that's a key distinction in what makes collective impact different from traditional collaboration. A second distinction that we often see is around how people use data. I heard somebody say, how does this not just become about evaluation, right? Beating me up as a partner. The use of data in collective impact partnerships is critical, right? And we've seen this in education for many years. I worked prior to this in healthcare. We saw this happen in healthcare, right? The use of data for accountability and accountability alone will not get you to population level outcomes, period. Using data to beat people up or to hold them accountable in a way that's not productive, as opposed to thinking about how we can use data today to improve things tomorrow, is a fundamental shift in moving from traditional collaboration to collective impact. We're not talking about multi-year blind studies, controlled trials, evaluation. We're talking about what can I learn today that's going to help me with kids Tuesday. That's the way we have to start to use data for collective impact partnerships. The third thing, I used to work at the Transit Authority in Southwest Ohio. So I was a partner in the local Strive partnership, thinking about how we were going to realign bus service in Cincinnati to better support kids to get to jobs, right? One of the things, when my boss first came in and told me we were part of this education partnership, I was like diving under the table, right? It was like one more partnership. How many people have had that, like one more? It's the 7 a.m. meeting, it's the Saturday half-day retreat because you're on the board for the nonprofit, and right, you can't meet during people's work days. Traditional collaboration is often that extra thing that you do. You have to staff systems change. If you want to change systems to get better, more equitable outcomes, you have to, or you should, hire somebody to do it, right? Who's waking up every day thinking about the health of your system. If you think this is going to be some add-on thing that a teacher's going to do or a school coordinator, right? Ted talked about the burden on schools. You can't do that, right? And the fourth thing, and I'm sure this has never happened in any of your communities, but in Cincinnati, we had a bunch of wealthy white folks, and they would go out and they'd go to a city like New York, and they'd say, I just found this incredible new program. It costs $1 million. It serves 35 kids. If we bring this back to Cincinnati, Shangri-La, right? It is the silver bullet that will solve all of our problems. And what we weren't doing, and what we had to fundamentally shift to do, is say, what works right now in our community to support our kids? And how can we do more of that? How can we stop the importation of programs and start to think about what actually works for kids on the ground in our community? And how can we create the infrastructure both the people infrastructure and the data infrastructure to identify and scale that in our communities. The vision here, right, is about how you move from that image on the left. People think about education as a school thing, to moving to something that much more closely resembles that image on the right, which is about putting kids at the center of all of our work, right? I was part of the transit authority. I was trying to figure out how can I shift bus service to better support kids in Southwest Ohio. The housing authority, right? Thinking about how are we providing services in a way that allow kids to be able to read on grade level. That's the work. I would be remiss if I didn't say this looks like very institutional on the right? But you could imagine like Chance the Rapper on there, right? You can think about all the social influences. If we actually organized the things that influence kids' outcomes and put the kids at the center of that, as opposed to putting the institutions at the center of that, that's what we're trying to do. All 69 of the communities that I mentioned in the Strive Together network are organized around these 7 outcomes. So every one of our communities holds accountability for these 7 outcomes along a child's developmental pathway, right? And what we have set as a goal, we started as a national organization in 2011, we started as a local partnership 2006, and we had originally set a goal that we wanted 5 communities by 2018 to be moving population level outcomes, at least 60% of those outcomes. I'm excited to announce that by the end of this year, we should have 8 communities that are achieving population level change in 60% of these outcomes. We're setting a new goal that we want 24 communities by 2023 moving these outcomes and eliminating disparities. And so that is our focus. That is where we as an organization are heading, and that's why we're so excited about the work happening in the Pacific Northwest and really all over the country. But I think what we're recognizing is to get to that, particularly the elimination of disparities, you can't just have the traditional partners at the table. You have to have folks like housing. You have to have folks like healthcare, right? If you want to talk about problems in Cincinnati in early childhood, you have to talk about how do we integrate our health systems. You have to talk about asthma rates, right? You have to talk about the things that are actually having impact on kids. We see that replicated in communities all over the country. These are 4 principles that we care about, right? Leveraging existing assets, engaging the community, creating a culture of continuous improvement, and the elimination of locally defined disparities. We hold accountability nationally for racial and socioeconomic disparities, but we also acknowledge that for some communities they might have additional disparities that they might want to define locally, right? But ultimately, nationally, we hold racial and socioeconomic disparities. I won't put up our theory of action. Someone told me the other day it's not like a first date tool, but if you want to check it out, it's at strivetogether.org, right? If you're a process wonk, check it out. But ultimately, I hope what you see on this map is a community somewhere near you, right? And happy to follow up after the conversation today, but there are somewhere north of 74 million kids across this country, and we certainly hope that over the next few years we're growing our population and holding accountability not just for the 10.4 million, but moving towards that 74 million so that we can hold ourselves accountable for that kind of population level change.
All right. Judy, you want to spend just a few minutes talking about
Sure.
your experience?
Sure. Do you have the?
Sure.
So if I were sitting in the audience and I looked at this slide, I might say, what's the problem in Bellevue? You should be able, those numbers are not great. But let me tell you a little bit about Bellevue, Washington. Perhaps you've heard of Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Nordstrom. So in our state, even still, that's what people think of when they think of Bellevue. But there are hidden disparities that don't show up in our data. And 18 years ago, when I was an elementary principal, I had the opportunity to get involved in a project called the Wraparound Project. And it was the start of an idea, and it was funded by the city and the school district and United Way. And it was about bringing many people together to look at an issue to try and come up with solutions. And I was a grateful elementary principal because I was in a school where there were 39 languages spoken, and there was 70% of the students qualified for free or reduced lunch. This is in Bellevue. And this was in Bellevue, and the people who lived on the other side of Bellevue didn't know that these populations existed right in their own city. So it was good to bring leadership together and to start looking at what can we do to support the kids and families in that school. And at the time, I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so my hope and dream for my school population, and people would ask me, what do you need? What do you want? I said, I want for my school kids to have what I can provide to my own children, or that I have other people helping provide for my children. Fast forward, after many years as a principal, I was asked to be the executive director of student services, and I thought it was a perfect fit because I could do on a larger scale what I had been doing at Lake Hills Elementary. And so I set about doing that. And at the same time, part of my assignment was to be the school district liaison to the Eastside Pathways Board of Directors, because the school district is a major partner and there's a permanent seat there. And so, okay, there I go. I'm on the board of directors of this fledgling organization that was the vision of one extraordinary gentleman. And I looked at it as a larger version of what we had tried to do at my elementary school. And it was with a lot of partners and a lot of people around the community saying they knew what we needed to do. But it was at the very, very beginning. I don't even know how old Strive was then, but baby. So we were a baby in the network and trying to figure this all out. So I was on the board of directors, and I still am. And then I had an opportunity to be on the partner leadership committee, and I still am, but we just went through a restructuring. And I've had had opportunity to work on the collaborative. So I really got to understand the work. And I'll tell you, it's adaptive work. If any of you have read any of Ron Heifetz, it is adaptive work. It is not about technical solutions to problems. It can be a long and slow process, but it is true partnership where both partners gain something. I think too often partnership is I came knocking at your door and I either need something from you or I want to give you something, whether it's what you want or not. And that had been my experience as an elementary principal early on, was people would come to me and say, we want to help, but it was always, and this is what we do. It wasn't what do you need or what do you need for your families or what do your families want. It was, this is our program, this is what we want to give you. True partnership is when both partners benefit. And that's one of the beautiful things about collective impact, which we're going to talk more about. Really essential in the work that we've done in Bellevue, because of the hidden disparities and because of the gaps that exist, is we have been on a 6-year journey of doing racial equity work. Because you see, the population in Bellevue was majority white for so long, and then the demographics started changing, and they changed rapidly, and the school district was not prepared for it, and the school district employees were not prepared for it. And we are now a school district of almost 21,000 students coming from over 120 birth countries. And we have over 95 languages spoken in the district. So we are a microcosm of the world, and we have the world on our doorstep. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's a challenging thing. And what's particularly challenging is if you're an African American or Black student in our district, you might be the only Black student in the whole school. Or you may be one of 60. That's the range. So it's about us learning to see every single child in front of us as an individual with individual needs and seeing them as a human being. Our district is doing a lot of work right now on relationship, relationship, relationship. You're not teaching math, you're teaching children, and math happens to be the subject. So it's relationship in the classroom, it's relationship in the community, it's relationship across the nation with our Strive Network partners. It's all about relationship. Just to give you an idea of some other hidden things in our data, one of our elementary schools, 75% of the students speak a first language other than English. So talking to them about services for English language learners just doesn't make sense. They're a multilingual school, and so services look different. So the other wonderful thing about collective impact and how I've evolved over time is I actually use the collective impact model now in the work I do in my own department. It's talk about breaking down silos. Education is rife with silos. We've got this department, we've got that department, never shall they speak. We're changing the way we do business as a school district because of our work with collective impact. So, if I haven't said it enough, collective impact is a good thing. It's a good thing when you understand it and then you make sure that you're not doing things to people, but you're doing with people. You're walking alongside and you're listening to what people need. You're not telling them. You're listening to students. You're not telling them. And so, two things I want to leave you with. Collective impact is a good thing, and doing the work in partnership, in relationship, and alongside people, not to them, is critical. Thank you.
All right, Jessica, and you have the burden of being last, so you only got a few minutes, and then we gotta do questions. So sorry.
Well, I think Judy made all of my points, so that's a good sign that we're both involved in collective impact and the same concepts are resonating. We found Puget Sound Educational Service District. You might be wondering, what is an educational service district? You all have one in your state. They're called education service agencies, and they all have the housing authority's contact information, by the way, because we presented at their national conference last year. So really, if you take one thing away from my part of the presentation, is to please go reach out to your educational service agency, because we are regional intermediaries. And in our region, we've really facilitated schools and school districts partnering with institutional partners like housing authorities, as well as very small and all different sizes of community-based organizations. And in that role of facilitating partnerships, and in some cases actually leveraging money and funding those partnerships and investing in them, we found that relationship is really at the root. And that's why I say Judy stole all my points, because that's really what we're finding, is that both partners have to get something out of a partnership and have to value something. So if you're going to a partner, they have to get something out of it and want what you're offering. And we're finding that that's really influencing Puget Sound ESD as well. So we've moved beyond just facilitating partnerships with others, and now we're actually going out to partners and having them inform our programming. We've invited TED to help facilitate and plan an entire institute that several hundred people attended last summer on how to facilitate partnerships. So we've invited people from the community to come and inform our strategic planning. This is something that we see as critical to meeting our mission. Put it up there.
Questions, so I'm not asking and answering questions myself. So.
All right. Hello, everyone. So returning, I'm assuming some of the questions that were asked earlier got answered, but I'm going to circle back to a couple of them. There was a question: what process do you put in place to identify shared goals, MOUs, and a structure for accountability? I feel like the answer to that is collective impact, but I don't know if there was any other expansion that you would do on that.
I was going to ask if Colin could give the 5, because I'm sure I'll miss one, but the 5 elements of effective collective impact that have to be present.
So we actually use a slightly different frame than the FSG, okay. but the 5 that are kind of coined in the original FSG article, I believe, are something like common agenda, mutually reinforcing activities, continual communications. That's how much we shared measurement, right? So from Strive Together perspective, we actually use shared community vision, evidence-based decision-making, collaborative action, and investment and sustainability. And then we've sort of broken those out across developmental phases. So there's an exploring phase of work, there's an emerging, sustaining, and then a phase that's really focused on systems change. So if you're interested, I mentioned the theory of action is on our website. But I will tell you, so we actually we assess all of our communities every year against the theory of action. So that's, you break it down, it ends up being a series of quality benchmarks. It's like a big process map, right? And we have evidence and documents from all of these communities like I could give you 50 data sharing agreements from partnerships all over the country on how different partners are sharing data. In Cincinnati, for example, there's 300 partners that collect and connect individual student-level data, ranging from the connection of academic outcomes to things like tutoring, mentoring, dosage of tutoring, mentoring, right? Looking at asset mapping around partnerships. So there are some technical things that you can do around the formalizing of some of this, but definitely I would, if I haven't done enough plugs yet for the theory of action, would check out the theory of action.
There was also a question about continuity and how to sustain partnerships, and I wonder who on the panel would like to speak to what it takes to, building partnerships is one thing, sustaining them over time and staying focused over time and producing results over time is something entirely different.
Yeah, just from my own experience, so July will be 4 years in my position, and there's maybe 7 or 8 people out of, say, 50 that are still in their positions. And so continuity and sustainability is, a real thing, right? It's a real issue. And I think I come back to the more we can have these types of partnerships that we've been talking about that are community, focused, and institutions and organizations are buying in to that and owning that. People are always going to come and go, but I think if you have that united mission and that vision, and there's a structure put in place for managing that type of turnover across organizations, I think that's where we're going to be more effective. In Bellevue, for example, I feel like we've had that continuity more, whereas in another district that does not have this type of partnership, I'm constantly, every year I'm doing hi, I'm Ted, I work for the Housing Authority, let me talk with you about what we do, and it's kind of like every year. And so I think even if it's not collective, a formal collective impact partnership, coming together around those common goals and, formalizing things, putting some structures in place, thinking about roles and responsibilities so that when we do have turnover in positions, those things are built in. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. So at Puget Sound ESD, we were the fiscal and grant management agent for a federal Race to the Top grant that was in support of our region's collective impact initiative. And so there were 7 school districts, and we committed to about 20 different initiatives from pre-K through college and career. And when we looked at what stuck at the end, it was really those efforts that had been embedded in district strategic plans. So thinking about what Ted said about embedding it into the structure. Even better if a district passed a policy in support of that initiative. And it was very important to have the leaders visibly commit. That said, we had 7 school districts, and we went through, I think, 17 superintendents in 4 years. So even though that happened, because we had policies and we had strategic plan, some of the investments were institutionalized and they really did stick. We also invested in things that people wanted. So for example, we made the PSAT free during the school day to all high school students, so it was part of high school. Nobody wanted that taken away, especially the parents. So thinking about where there's will, what people want, and how to get leaders visibly involved, as well as policy and strategic plans were very important.
I can add too that we are on our second superintendent, which is pretty good in a 6-year time period. I think what's working for us is we have champions in the community. So people in influential positions who have said, this is important work, this needs to continue. So, and champions on the school board. And I'm thinking, if you're in an area where something like this doesn't exist, how would you get it started? You find the people who are invested in the community, you find the people who are invested in children and education, and you help them understand that schools can't do it alone and that it truly does take a village. So the community has to invest in the community.
I'm going to shoot to the back here.
Hi, yes, Dill, short for Dylan C. Hardy, Cambridge Housing Authority. I wanted to ask, because I know you mentioned a lot of great resources about collective impact kind of across organizations, but did you have internal meeting? Oh, thank you. Did you have internal meetings and gatherings to kind of do collective impact, like in your organization first, getting all your departments and folks internally on the same page? Like, how did you navigate that? Because it's great to externally be collectively, impactful.
Progress.
But
No. Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, and I think I own the role of coming back to the housing authority and kind of sharing out, here's all of the different stuff that we talked about. This issue came up. This issue came up. Talking to those people, plugging them in to it. So it's like I'm kind of like the partnership facilitator. So many people across our organization are involved and show up and participate in collaborative efforts, but that's kind of my role at the housing authority, and like I said, it's a work in progress. I think I always reflect on that. Like I think I could be doing a better job in doing that and really harnessing the horsepower of the housing authority to support the work, but.
So I have been the champion, I have been the true believer, but I'm bringing other people along. At first, it really kind of went by the way of, well, isn't this just a lot of do-good people in the community, again, wanting to do something? And so I got dismissed a lot, but I kept coming back and saying, no, this is, we as education leaders, we've all read about adaptive leadership. And trying to help people understand that's what this is. So I had a lot of people that I would say, I need you to go to this meeting, I need you to go to this collaborative, I need you to be part of this. And they'd say, I don't have time to sit around and look at problems and talk about them. We have to do. We don't have enough time to do our jobs as it is. The people who stuck with it are now the champions with me, saying, no, you've got to stick in the conversation. You have to stay long enough to not just put a Band-Aid on it. So it takes time.
I'm hearing a theme of relationships and sticking with it, and the importance of shared language and shared goals. There were a couple of questions up front about decreasing territorialism and increasing trust as you're building partnerships. How do you, I forget how it was framed, alleviate fear that you're not there to judge and that you're there to help. And I feel like there's this common theme that you're all saying about it is the quality of the relationships and the investment over time. Is there anything that you would add to that, or am I correct in that assessment?
And keeping the kids and the families at the center,
Yeah.
I think, would be that other piece of it.
Do we have any other audience questions? Because I've got a couple more I can ask. So can you all talk about, in these partnerships, what are some challenges that you or your organizations have experienced, and how have you overcome them, or how are you currently working on them?
So the gentleman who had the idea to start Eastside Pathways, and I should clarify, Eastside Pathways is not part of the roadmap project. So I don't know why I needed to do that, but I did. he tragically was killed in an accident, and he really was the vision holder in the beginning. And we were so new at this that everybody thought, this is it, this is all going to fall apart, because we're not far enough into it to really understand what we're doing. But somebody stepped up and said, you know, we owe it to Bill to keep his vision alive. Let's keep going. Let's see if we can make this work. And so we've kept it going. So through the loss of the visionary, through the loss of he was the executive director, most of the board is turned over. This is why I said we're not part of the roadmap project. We don't have Race to the Top funding. It's really a grassroots organization, and so it's dependent on local funding and foundation funding, but curiously, we're still trying to help people understand the needs that exist in our community. So a lot of the money in our community goes to South King County. So we're having to say, no, there are kids in your own community you don't even know about who need support. So I'm sorry, I've just lost the question. Challenges. There, challenge. Challenge.
Check.
Understand who we are and who the children are and who the families are.
Yeah.
There are people who live in Bellevue who don't even know that there are housing authority sites in the city. So
Yep.
we're raising awareness.
Yeah, and I would say quickly on my end, the challenges, that's why I shared the kind of the how and the why, those domains, because my first year on the job, I was going to roadmap meetings or even going to Eastside Pathway meetings. I had no idea how I could help. I didn't know how I could insert. I didn't know. Yeah, and so that was a challenge for me, and that's why we had to do a lot of work of reflection, learning, research, all of it to really kind of land on those domains and start thinking about goals that we would want to see for our families and kids. And then it became much more clear on how can I allocate my resources and time in support of that thing. So, and I think so that was a challenge, and a positive outcome of that has been our work around chronic absenteeism in King County. Washington State ranks as one of the worst in the country, which for us is like really embarrassing, I think, because we like to think of ourselves as, this really progressive state, but this is it's a fact. We're like 48 or something in chronic absenteeism, but because we learned that we were in a position to address chronic absenteeism, we've been able to allocate our resources to that and have kind of filled a gap. And in a sense, because we have 20,000 kids across the county, we're in a unique position to encourage everybody to care more about school attendance, to support schools in addressing chronic absenteeism, to lead an attendance awareness campaign during the month of September. And so and through our efforts, one of our schools that has a very high population, nearly 35% of the school are our families. Through 3 years of our partnership with them in addressing chronic absenteeism, they went from nearly a 20% chronic absenteeism rate at their school to the last learning community meeting that we had, they were down to 7% across the school. And so that's a bright spot that I just want to call out, and the challenge of knowing where we can help and trying to figure that out is really what led us to that.
And if I can add a little bit more to that as well.
Yeah, we've got about another minute.
Oh, okay. Well, one challenge that came up in our partnerships was the power dynamic, and it was very focused on who gets the credit, who gets the money, and it was really about me, and that just is a non-starter in a partnership or a relationship. So we really found that, as institutions, it's not enough for us as institutions to partner, but we also as institutions have a responsibility to partner with other community-based organizations and to share power. And we found as an institution, we have nothing to lose by sharing that power. And in fact, we can use our positional power to really give voice to many smaller organizations that are representing the people we want to be serving.
I think there were a couple of questions that didn't get answered, so I just encourage those of you who asked questions in the beginning and didn't get them answered to just follow up with the panel, but we are at time. Thank you all so much.
And we are going into a very quick report back, so I'm going to ask everybody to stay where you are, and when the air walls come up, to stay where you are. Thank you.
Well, I think they reached out. Never go, but you can't get away from it. Flying back Monday night, Tuesday morning, back talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can shoot an email like on Monday when I'm back in the office. So, yeah. Well, you don't even know. I mean, we'll get into it. There's it's a huge piece of work for us. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So countywide, we're besides county government and United Way, we're probably the third largest funder. And that's thanks to our size. It's kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's like that we're able to do stuff that not everybody can do. So that's not a however, there's stuff that is replicable. Yeah. So I'll show you Monday. Do you know Judy? No, I love it. Yeah. Right. Sounds good. Thank you.